In this video, I'm going to give you a little tour of my second complete tiny sketchbook. It took me about a year to complete this sketchbook because it's a sketchbook that I reserved for taking outside on painting adventures. So every painting in the sketchbook was painted outside and I filmed it all. I have this little green band that I kept on the outside to hold all of the pages together. It has this adorable little strawberry on the outside, but don't be fooled because I was pretty disappointed with the paper on the inside, which was a cellulose paper unlike the cotton blend paper of my previous sketchbook. But I always like to finish what I start, so I was determined to complete a tiny painting for the entire sketchbook. About a year ago, I did a tour of my first ever tiny sketchbook, and I will link this one in the description. The sizes of the pages is very similar. It's about 2 by 2 inches or 5 by 5 centimeters. All of the paintings were completed with this little palette. It's a little wooden palette that I got from Go Draw. It has magnets that hold the two different sides together, and then you open it up and it has magnets on the inside that hold it together while you're painting. And then I used different chip clips like this one of various colors throughout the whole painting process, and I would just attach it to the sketchbook like this. All of the other supplies that I used for this painting are here, and I will link a video in the description that goes into more detail about all of my favorite supplies. And I also filmed the creation of each of these paintings, and I'll put the creation video on the left-hand side of the screen. And I really hope that this little sketchbook tour encourages you to try painting outside as well. It's something that I started to do seriously around 2016, and it's completely changed my life. And I think if you try it, it will change yours too. This first painting was completed on June 2nd, 2023, and I was with my friend Sunny. In fact, for several of these paintings, I was with my friend Sunny, and so looking through them is a bit like looking through a memory book, which makes it extra nostalgic and special to me. We went to Vire Island in a nearby town called Totnes in England, and we sat on the island and painted this scene right here. It was a brilliantly sunny day. In fact, Sunny and I had gone to the market in advance and purchased little sun hats that we wore to protect us from the sun. My second painting in this book was just a few days later on June 5th, 2023, and I went to the Exeter Quay to paint with one of my friends named Mia. And this was a really challenging composition because everything is horizontal, and that made it a little bit tricky to create interesting vignettes. But I did have the arches of these shops that were built into the wall here. And I tried to add a little bit of interest with some of the kayakers who were going past. After this one, I took quite a break from this sketchbook for a few months. I had a trip to the US and I was doing other tiny paintings as well as some larger line and wash paintings at that time. But then on August 16th, 2023, I returned home to England and I took this to a little nearby park. In fact, if you like this one, on my Patreon, I have a narrated tiny painting of the entire process. I found this little blue house on the hill, and I really liked the violet tones and the maroon tones in this bush on the left. So I just sat down underneath a tree, made a little friend, and painted this painting. I was pretty happy with this one, although this is where I, again, was really noticing the difference between using a cellulose paper and a cotton blend, because many of the details got muddy and were difficult to layer or even to lift any of the colors that I wanted to lighten. And I think that's why it was about another 2 months before I returned to it. And in that time, I had other paintings I was doing. I had a commission for Burberry, I had a bout with pneumonia, and then I had an entire month of drawing every day in my version of Inktober, which I dub Housetober. But then on November 3rd, my friend Sunny was visiting, and we went up to my secret garden behind my house, and we drew the view over the hills in the distance. And I painted this scene a few times. In fact, I have paintings of it in my previous book and another one in this sketchbook later on. And it's been an interesting one to paint during different seasons. And they are currently working on developing these hills, so it's been really important to me to capture them before they're ruined by bulldozers. So this one is really nostalgic to me. And it's just an example about how art can capture a moment in time. After this, I had a commission for some CD art as well as a commission for Pentel to create a few different artworks, and that all kept me busy. And then on December 21st, the solstice, Sunny and I got together again, and again we went to Totnes and we walked along the River Dart and found this little spot and painted this. It didn't take a lot of time to paint this one, but I really, really loved the simplicity of it. And it was one of those magical days where everything just came together rather quickly. So this is probably one of my favorite ones in this sketchbook. And then after this, I was creating other artwork in my little watercolor pochade box, as well as some other tinies. And I had a visit from my son and his wife. And so it was a few months before I got back to it. And then on February 2nd, 2024, I again went on a little painting adventure with Sunny, and we went to Widdicombe in the Moor in Dartmoor National Park in England. It was a very cold day, and we found respite in this little pub and painted the view that we saw through the window. And there is a longer painting adventure of this one if you're interested in seeing it, and I will also link that one in the description. I love looking through this book because it just reminds me in every physical way of what it was like to paint not just outside or on location, but also with friends. So I look through this book and I'm just filled with affection and appreciation for the times that I've had in my life to spend and paint with other artists and friends. On February 13th of that same year, I was waiting to collect my dog from the groomers. And in the alley behind the groomers, I just was captivated by the different rooftops and the chimneys all lined up like little soldiers with a little peek of the greenery and the telephone lines. And it was pouring rain, and it just seemed like the perfect time to do a little tiny painting. And I did go over a little bit. In fact, I picked up my dog and she had to patiently wait while I finished it. But it was a really fun perspective challenge for me to do all of these different rooftops. A few weeks later, on February 23rd, I was in a town called Dawlish. And again, it was a very rainy day. In fact, it was a very rainy spring in 2024. And they have a green in the center and you could park around it. So I found a spot that had this beautiful view of the church and a few of the different townhouses. And I paid the meter for an hour and I really had to hustle to finish this one. I was really noticing at this stage in the sketchbook that I wasn't able to get the colors to be as vibrant as I had been able to get them in my previous sketchbook. And I'm putting that mostly down to this cellulose paper compared to the cotton blend of the previous sketchbook. But I'm also interested in exploring using my travel watercolor brush instead of the aquash brush. Even though I love the convenience of using the water brush, sometimes when you want to get the colors really pigmented, it can be a little trickier. And between that and the cheaper paper, I look back at some of these paintings and wish that I could have added a few pops of brighter colors here and there. On February 29th, I opened the window in my bedroom and painted the next door neighbor's beautiful magnolia tree. This little tree brings me so much joy every year to watch it blooming and then to watch it in full bloom. And it really doesn't last for that long of a period. So I really just wanted to practice painting it. In fact, I painted this one again this year. And in my memory, I was thinking that this one wasn't very good, but I actually think it was maybe a little bit better than the one I did this year. So maybe there's something to be learned from some of my older work. And that's one of the nice things about filming yourself painting, because you can revisit your process and see the things that you did, and then later decide what was successful or wasn't as successful. A few days later, on March 1st, I again wanted to do a little painting adventure. In fact, this one is a longer painting vlog, and again, I'll link that one in the description as well. I went to a coffee shop in a town called Newton Abbot, and I loved this old bank building. So I was able to sit in the window and look at this building. I didn't have a lot of time because the sun was setting early and the cafe was closing. So I really had to get my skates on and draw and paint this one pretty quickly. But I actually liked that about that. I liked that it forced me to keep my lines really loose and not to overwork anything or make it too rigid or stiff. And I did use a fountain pen for this one, which I was experimenting with and I really liked. And about 2 weeks later, on March 13th, 2024, I went to visit my mother in America, and there's a coffee shop near her house called Clancy Brothers, and they had a really lovely bench seat across the window. In fact, you can see all of this because there's a longer painting adventure for this one as well, which again, I'll link. And the challenge for me was drawing a building that is really kind of generic for America, which is a Walgreens. But I was really captivated by the way that they put these little fake dormers in the building in an attempt to make it a little more interesting, and some of the cars that were parked and the traffic lights, and also this tree that was in front of the building. So this tree was right outside the window that I was looking at, and I thought it added a lot of visual interest to this painting. So I'm pretty happy with this one as well. And it just goes to show that you can take a subject that isn't innately that inspiring, and with some tenacity and just careful looking, you can find an interesting and beautiful way to approach it. Again, I took a few weeks off from using this book, and then on April 1st, I decided to do a little bout of PleinAirpril, which is where you paint outside or on location every day in April. So this is the view from my window, and I really liked the different array of colors of these bushes. Again, these bushes are always changing a little bit in color, and I could see a little bit of the hills in the distance. And I was just really enjoying practicing different line work and really trying to challenge myself to capture an array of different greens. So I actually was pretty pleased with this one. And then on April 2nd, again, it was pouring rain. So I just drove around and I found this beautiful little townhouse that had these gorgeous pink flowers. And again, this pale green bush with some of the light green in front and some green in the background and some wintry trees still that hadn't sprouted. And I just really loved this painting. Poppy was with me in the car. She was a bit miserable, but I think that this, again, is one of my favorite paintings in this little sketchbook. And it just, again, goes to show you that even in bad weather, you can just use your little car or van or whatever you have and take it out and find some inspiration. And then have your car heater on high so that you can stay warm and still paint something outside. On April 3rd, I had a bit of an unsuccessful painting. I was experimenting again with a water-soluble fountain pen, and it just was too overly dominant. The nib was too thick for this paper, and it didn't go well. So you can see here a series of me using a milky brush and other things to try to tone down some of the colors. And I don't know, it's not the worst painting in the world, but it was just these beautiful old English oak trees on the side of the road. And it was an adventure for sure. And you know what? They can't all be the biggest successes, so it's okay. On April 4th, I stayed closer to home and painted this little view in my garden. The daffodils were coming up. In fact, they were starting to wilt a little bit here, but I loved the colors of those with this little garden ornament and the blue of this pot behind them. And so again, I didn't have a lot of time, but I put my chair in the garden so that I was quite close to it, and I painted this. And I don't normally paint botanicals or even little still lifes, but I liked this, and it really inspired me to think that maybe I should include more of those into my general practice. On April 5th, again, the weather was super windy. It was a really, really stormy day. So I drove around and I found this little scene on the side of the road and parked my car. I took Poppy for a little walk, and then we settled into the car and I painted this little scene. I loved the way that these houses were clustered together. And again, the interesting different angles of the roof and all of this foliage and this little brick wall and the different trees. So I really liked a lot of the line work on this one, and I'm pretty pleased with how this one turned out. I took a day off, and then on April 7th, again, it was later in the day, and I decided to paint the view of my garden from a window on the inside because, again, it was really cold. It was late in the day. And full disclosure, my garden was really ugly this year. It was overgrown with weeds. We had scaffolding in this area for most of the winter, so the garden was a complete embarrassment and a disarray, but that makes for the most interesting paintings. So we had this wheelbarrow with all these weeds growing in it and plants all around, and you could see some of the little garden ornaments and trees and shed in the background, and I really like this painting. This was a lot of fun to paint. And again, it made me think that I need to include more little still life scenes into my practice. I took a break after this, partly because the weather was really bad, but also because I had a very good friend visiting. And so I did other paintings, and I had a commission, and I had other stuff happening at the end of April. But I returned to this tiny book again on May 9th. I had a different friend visiting, a neighbor who I sometimes paint with, and I noticed that she was putting in more architecture in her scene, and that inspired me to do a different take on this same scene that I had already painted a few times before. I have a little bit of the chimney in, and I tried to shift the perspective a little bit. So the tree over here, which I would normally put in the center, is actually moved over to the right, and you can see some of the blooms, and I think I was pretty successful on this one. And again, it's a memory of these fields before they were ruined by bulldozers. As I've been visiting all of these paintings that I created alongside Sunny, it's been a little bit sad because she recently moved back to the US. But that's another wonderful thing about these little sketches. When I look at them, I feel like I'm with her again, in a way that you don't get from a mere photograph. And that's one of the unexpected blessings that comes with painting outside. A month later, on June 1st, I took my sketchbook up to the tiny garden once again. And this one is featured in a longer YouTube video that I'll link in the description. And it's titled Everything You Need to Know About Tiny Painting, from the supplies to the process that I used. So this one actually is an in-depth tutorial that you can see here on YouTube. And it's not the first time I painted this little tiny house. My husband and his nephew built this up in our back garden a few years ago, and I just love it. It's a lovely little place to visit. It doubles as a little writing room or a summer art studio, and I'm really happy that I've immortalized it in this little sketchbook. After this, I went to the US again, and I was busy with a lot of tutorials and other artwork that I had to do for Patreon, and also just visiting my family. But when I came back, I had one page left to finish, and this was one of the most magical painting adventures I've ever had in my life. This one is part of a collection that I did for Pentel last August 2024, where I went on 3 different painting adventures. And this was the first one where I went to the moors, to a place called the 10 Commandment Stones. If you're more interested in that, you can check out the vlog. I talk all about it and actually go on a hike and take you there. But on the way back to the van, these wild sheep were just roaming, and there was this little baby who was following another mother, and I think he had been temporarily misplaced from his own mother. But it was so misty and beautiful, and I just had to put him in. I've talked about other paintings that were some of my favorites, but I'd have to say if I was looking at just the overall experience as well as the painting, this one is definitely my favorite. And it's nice to end a sketchbook with a painting that you really, really love. And that's it for this sketchbook. There were only 20 pages. I really like several of the paintings that I did in here. Let me know in the comments which ones were your favorites. I didn't see how any sketchbook could be as precious to me as my first one, but this one definitely is, because it's a collection of memories, several of which I shared with different friends or made longer painting adventures about. And so when I look through this tiny sketchbook, I don't just see a collection of little paintings of different places. I'm actually transported back in time in a visceral way to those moments in time when I was painting and drawing. If you've never tried painting outside, I really hope that you give it a try because I think it just might change your life too. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your day here with me going through this sketchbook. I really appreciate your support in watching these videos and going along on these little painting adventures with me. And again, I hope they inspire you to go on some painting adventures of your own. I hope you have a beautiful day with many happy painting adventures of your own. We have more visitors. He needs to be in the painting. I think this one might have a different mom and is possibly lost.